In 1999, WWE was trying to capitalize on the Attitude Era peak popularity by creating something no entertainment company had attempted before. A massive Times Square flagship that would combine retail, dining, and nightclub experiences under one roof for wrestling fanatics. On paper, it actually worked. It didn't. Because WWE The World wasn't built to last. The problem wasn't execution. The problem was identity. It looked like a theme restaurant, but it was a niche fan club, and those two don't coexist in Times Square. And for a moment, it worked. Not because it was good, but because it was stone cold Steve Austin's moment, and wrestling was everywhere. This isn't a story about bad restaurants. It's a story about mistaking fandom intensity for market size. And once you see it, you'll start noticing it everywhere. It all started with Vince McMahon's grand vision during wrestling's hottest period. In 1999, WWE was pulling 6 million plus viewers every Monday night. Stone Cold Steve Austin was a household name. The Rock was electrifying crowds. And McMahon asked, why stop at television? The concept was born from McMahon's obsession with legitimizing wrestling as mainstream entertainment. He had watched Planet Hollywood and the Hard Rock Cafe print money by combining food with pop culture memorabilia. But wrestling fans were more passionate than movie fans. They didn't just watch, they lived this stuff. McMahon chose 1501 Broadway in Times Square, right in the heart of Tourist Central. The 25,000 square feet space would span 3 floors of the most expensive real estate in America. The first floor would be a restaurant and retail store. The second floor would house a nightclub called The World. The third floor would be corporate offices and production facilities. The initial investment was estimated at $20 million, with annual rent exceeding $2 million. But McMahon was betting that wrestling's cultural momentum could justify those astronomical numbers. At first, it seemed he might be right. WWE The World opened on January 11th, 2000, with massive fanfare. The opening attracted over 2,000 people, including wrestling stars The Rock, Mick Foley, and D-Generation X. ESPN covered it as a legitimate business story, not just wrestling news. In the first month, there were lines around the block. Tourists were curious, wrestling fans were ecstatic, and media outlets were fascinated by this intersection of sports entertainment and fine dining. Initial reports suggested the restaurant was serving over 1,000 meals per day. WWE stock was trading near its all-time high of $30 per share, and Wall Street analysts praised McMahon's expansion into lifestyle entertainment. The company projected $15 million in annual revenue from the Times Square location alone. For those first few weeks, it looked like McMahon had cracked the code on monetizing fandom beyond television. The wrestling empire was expanding into physical spaces, and the initial numbers suggested he was on the right track. WWE The World was not just a restaurant, it was a 3-story wrestling universe. The ground floor featured a full-service restaurant with tables surrounded by authentic wrestling ring ropes. Glass cases displayed championship belts, costumes worn by legends like Hulk Hogan, and pieces of the steel cage from Hell in a Cell matches. The second-floor nightclub called The World operated Thursday through Saturday nights, with DJ sets, VIP areas, and occasional appearances by wrestling personalities. The third floor housed WWE's New York corporate offices and served as a production facility for some of their programming. The real innovation was the integration with WWE television programming. They broadcast live segments from the restaurant during Monday Night Raw and SmackDown. Wrestlers appeared for meet and greets, autograph signings, and impromptu interviews while patrons ate dinner. The timing could not have been better. Wrestling was experiencing its highest mainstream popularity since the 1980s Hulkamania era. The Monday Night Wars between WWE and WCW had pushed storylines to soap opera levels of drama, attracting viewers who had never cared about wrestling before. Celebrities were spotted at WWE The World regularly. Musicians, actors, and athletes who had grown up watching wrestling now had a high-end venue to indulge their fandom. It was not uncommon to see A-list celebrities sharing appetizers with wrestling superfans, creating a bizarre melting pot of entertainment culture. The menu tried to walk the line between upscale Times Square dining and wrestling-themed novelty. Signature items included the Stone Cold Stunner, A 16-ounce ribeye steak, the People's Elbow macaroni, lobster mac and cheese, and Mankind's Boiler Room Brawl, a seafood platter served in a steel briefcase. The restaurant featured multiple large-screen TVs showing wrestling content 24/7, and it also served wine lists and gourmet appetizers that would not look out of place at any upscale Manhattan restaurant. They were trying to convince wrestling fans they belonged in Times Square, while convincing Times Square diners they belonged in wrestling. Live programming was the crown jewel. WWE broadcast segments directly from the restaurant, making diners feel like they were part of the show. Stone Cold Steve Austin crashed through the restaurant's glass entrance. The Rock delivered promos while patrons ate dinner in the background. The nightclub upstairs featured appearances by wrestling personalities, themed parties around major pay-per-view events, and VIP packages that included meet and greets with WWE stars. It created an atmosphere where fans could feel like they were part of the WWE universe rather than just passive spectators. During its peak in 2000 to 2001, WWE The World was reportedly generating $12 to $15 million annually. The restaurant served approximately 800 to 1,200 meals per day during its busiest periods. Weekend nightclub events regularly sold out their 400-person capacity at $25 to $50 cover charges. Merchandise sales were particularly strong, with exclusive WWE items available only at the Times Square location. Limited edition championship belts, signed photographs, and location-specific t-shirts generated significant additional revenue beyond food and beverage. For comparison, the average themed restaurant in Times Square was generating $8 to $12 million annually, so WWE The World was performing at the high end of expectations. The company projected they could expand the concept to Las Vegas, Chicago, and Los Angeles if the flagship location proved sustainable. When WrestleMania came to New York in 2001, WWE The World became the unofficial headquarters for wrestling fans from around the globe. Every table was booked weeks in advance, and the nightclub had a waiting list hundreds of names long. The first cracks appeared when WWE analyzed their customer demographics in late 2001. While wrestling fans were incredibly loyal, they made up only 30 to 40% of total customers. The majority were tourists who came once for the novelty and never returned. Worse, wrestling fans typically spent less per visit than traditional Times Square diners. They would order appetizers and beer while watching programming for hours, occupying valuable table space without generating the revenue density needed to justify Times Square rent. The restaurant faced another problem. Its decor and theme were tied to specific wrestlers and storylines. As characters evolved or left the company, portions of the restaurant became outdated. Updating displays and memorabilia became an ongoing expense that other themed restaurants did not face to the same degree. Meanwhile, the Attitude Era was cooling down. Television ratings began declining from their peak, and mainstream media attention was shifting away from wrestling. The Monday Night Wars ended when WWE purchased WCW in 2001, removing the competitive pressure that had driven much of wrestling's cultural relevance. Times Square rent was increasing annually, while WWE The World's revenue was plateauing. The $2 million+ annual rent represented nearly 15% of gross revenue, far above the 6 to 10% that restaurant industry experts recommend for sustainable operations. Turnover became another issue. The restaurant employed over 200 people during peak periods, but many were wrestling fans themselves who took the job to be close to the action rather than as a career in hospitality. This led to inconsistent service quality that hurt repeat business from non-wrestling patrons. The real crisis hit after September 11, 2001. Times Square foot traffic plummeted as tourism to New York City dried up. WWE The World's revenue dropped by an estimated 40 to 50% in the months following the attacks, while rent and operational costs remained fixed. At the same time, WWE was facing its own financial pressures. The company had gone public in 1999 at $17 per share, but was trading below $10 by 2002. The XFL Football League had failed spectacularly, costing WWE over $35 million. The company was looking for ways to cut costs and refocus on core wrestling operations. Internal WWE documents later revealed that the World was losing approximately $200,000 per month by late 2002. The nightclub component had never achieved consistent profitability, and restaurant margins were being crushed by Manhattan's operational costs. By this point, the restaurant was also facing the typical themed restaurant life cycle problem. The initial curiosity had worn off, and the novelty factor that brought in casual diners was gone. What remained was a core of wrestling fans who weren't numerous or wealthy enough to sustain the massive overhead. The fundamental problem was an audience mismatch. Wrestling fans were passionate but price-sensitive. They wanted to hang out for hours, watch free programming, and spend minimally. Times Square economics required high-spending customers with quick table turnover. Meanwhile, casual diners were put off by wrestling's perceived demographic. Families visiting Times Square didn't want their children exposed to wrestling's adult-oriented programming. Business diners found the theme too niche and juvenile for professional meetings. The novelty factor that drove initial curiosity lasted only 6 to 12 months. Unlike movie or music memorabilia, wrestling nostalgia appealed to a narrow demographic that wasn't large enough to sustain a Times Square operation. WWE also discovered that their most passionate fans preferred watching wrestling at home or in bars where they could react freely, drink cheaper beer, and not worry about disturbing other diners. The restaurant setting actually inhibited the communal viewing experience that made wrestling so appealing. McMahon tried various strategies to save the venture. They added more mainstream menu items, reduced wrestling content during lunch hours, and even considered rebranding portions of the space. But by late 2002, it was clear that the fundamental concept didn't work in that location at that scale. WWE The World officially closed on February 21st, 2003, after just over 3 years of operation. The company cited changing business priorities and lease restructuring as official reasons, but internal estimates suggest total losses exceeded $10 million. The space was immediately leased to Hard Rock Cafe, which ironically proved that the location could work, just not for wrestling. Hard Rock's broader musical appeal, tourist-friendly atmosphere, and established operational systems generated sustainable profits where WWE had failed. WWE retained ownership of all memorabilia and merchandise, much of which was redistributed to other company facilities or sold through their online store. The custom wrestling ring ropes and steel cage displays were dismantled and stored in WWE's Connecticut headquarters. The closure marked the end of WWE The World, and the company had already learned valuable lessons. They shifted their focus back to their core strengths: television production, live events, and direct-to-consumer merchandise. Today, the Hard Rock Cafe Times Square occupies the exact same space, serving burgers and displaying music memorabilia to the same tourist demographic WWE had tried to capture. The irony was not lost on industry observers. WWE had essentially created a successful restaurant concept for their competitors. The failure of WWE The World did not stop other entertainment companies from attempting similar ventures. Disney, Warner Brothers, and various sports leagues have all launched themed dining experiences with varying degrees of success. The attempt by WWE stands as one of the most ambitious and short-lived examples. The failure of WWE. The World illustrated the critical difference between fandom intensity and market size. Wrestling fans were among the most passionate in entertainment, but that passion did not translate to the spending habits and frequency required for Times Square economics. The experiment taught WWE to focus on what they did best: television content, live events, and merchandise sold directly to their core audience. Subsequent WWE ventures like their streaming service, training facilities, and merchandise partnerships proved far more successful than trying to force wrestling into traditional retail spaces. The broader lesson for entertainment companies was that themed restaurants work best with universally appealing properties. Movies, music, and sports have broad demographic appeal. Wrestling, despite its popularity, remained too niche for mainstream dining concepts. WWE. The World stands as a cautionary tale about mistaking cultural moments for sustainable business models. For a brief period, wrestling felt unstoppable, but unstoppable does not always mean profitable, especially when you are paying Times Square rent. From wrestling empire to restaurant relic, WWE. The World proved that passion does not always pay the bills. Sometimes the biggest fans make the worst customers, and the most expensive real estate requires the broadest possible appeal.